Welcome to the debate. Imagine logging off at 6 p.m. and your manager instantly gets an automated alert that your digital collaboration metrics are dipping. Now, is that the start of proactive, genuinely empathetic support, or is it a digital leash tightening around your neck?
It's a scenario that makes a lot of people instantly uncomfortable.
And for good reason, I think.
Exactly.
I mean, for decades, evaluating an employee's performance was essentially like looking at a single blurry photograph, right? Taken just once a year.
Mm-hmm.
You stare at this annual review, trying to piece together 365 days of complex, highly nuanced knowledge work from, well, a static snapshot.
Right. And honestly, that snapshot usually just captures whatever your manager happened to remember from like the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
We've all been in that annual review where your boss spends 10 minutes critiquing a single typo you made 9 months ago, just completely ignoring the massive project you delivered in March.
Oh, absolutely. The lighting in that blurry photograph is heavily filtered by the manager's own cognitive biases, you know?
Or their mood that day.
Or whether you just happen to share their communication style. It is an objectively terrible way to judge a year of someone's professional life.
It's fundamentally flawed at its core. But now we are replacing that single biased photograph with a continuous high-definition live stream.
So today we are diving into Jonathan H. Westover's analysis of the Integrated Personnel Evaluation Model, or the IPEM framework.
Right, the one originally conceptualized by Illich back in 2026.
Yes, that's the one. This framework maps out a total transformation of the workplace. We are moving away from those episodic, broken performance reviews into continuous, AI-driven, and theoretically, empathy-led systems.
And that opens up the central tension we really have to navigate today. Does integrating continuous data tracking and AI analytics into personnel evaluation genuinely enable more objective and empathetic leadership? Or does this relentless, granular data capture inevitably create a surveillance environment, one that actually destroys the very psychological safety it claims to foster?
Well, my stance is that thoughtfully governed AI and multidimensional metrics successfully strip away historical human bias, and by doing that, they create the necessary objective foundation for genuinely supportive, empathy-led development.
And my perspective is that the inherent contradiction between continuous algorithmic monitoring and true psychological safety simply cannot be engineered away. Constant data capture invariably shifts the psychological contract from mutual learning to, well, surveillance and compliance.
So to understand why this transformation is so vital, I think we first have to fully acknowledge just how structurally broken the legacy architecture is. When we rely on episodic supervisor ratings, we aren't actually measuring performance.
We are measuring perception.
Exactly. We're measuring perception. And the research on this is absolutely damning. If you look at the landmark work by Scullin and colleagues back in 2000, they demonstrated that performance ratings partition into different variance components.
Right.
What they found was that the rater-specific effects, meaning the idiosyncratic personal biases of the manager, often explain a larger proportion of the rating than the employee's actual job performance.
Yeah, you get the halo effect.
Precisely. So for those listening, think of the halo effect as doing one project incredibly well in January and your manager just assumes everything you do is gold for the rest of the year, regardless of the reality.
Mm-hmm.
Or the reverse, right? The recency bias, where a recent mistake eclipses a year of stellar work. It is a system fundamentally compromised by human subjectivity. What the IPEM framework does is revolutionary because it separates measurement from judgment.
Okay, but how so?
Well, by leveraging AI for descriptive and predictive analytics, organizations can capture multidimensional metrics. They look at inputs, processes, and outputs continuously.
Okay.
The organization gains an objective reality of performance that isn't dependent on a supervisor's flawed memory. And here's the crucial part. This data abundance does not replace the human element. It actually enables empathy.
Wow. I think that's quite a leap.
Well, think about it. When the AI handles the tracking and the metrics, managers are finally freed from having to act as administrative auditors. They don't have to keep a mental tally of everything you do.
Sure.
Instead, they can focus on continuous, developmentally focused micro-conversations. They can build a truly supportive environment based on facts, not flawed impressions.
Let me jump in here. I completely agree that legacy annual reviews are obsolete and riddled with bias. We have absolutely no disagreement there. The traditional system is broken.
Good. We agree on that.
We do. But replacing a flawed human judge with an inescapable digital one introduces a much more insidious threat to the modern workplace.
Wait, you see the AI as an inescapable digital judge?
I absolutely do. Because the foundational problem here is something Murphy and Cleveland identified back in 1995. When you mix evaluative and developmental objectives in real time, employees immediately activate impression management strategies.
Meaning they put on a performance?
Exactly. They stop being authentic. If we transition to, continuous performance management powered by digital collaboration platforms, we're generating a volume of behavioral data that totally overwhelms human processing.
Right, there is a lot of data.
A manager can't read every Slack message or track every minute spent in a Google Doc. So what happens? We default to algorithmic management. We rely on the AI to summarize this data, which inherently prioritizes measurable compliance over the complex, unquantifiable realities of knowledge work.
I don't think it necessarily prioritizes compliance over complexity, but go on.
Well, think about it this way. Imagine you are taking a highly complex, high-stakes university exam, and the proctors decide they want to support your well-being during the test, so they make you wear a clinical heart monitor.
Okay.
Every single fluctuation in your pulse is tracked and displayed on a dashboard to ensure you aren't getting too stressed.
Well, that sounds incredibly distracting.
Right, it is. The very instrument designed to measure and support your health becomes the primary source of your anxiety. It fundamentally alters how you perform on the exam because you're worried about your heart rate data, not the test questions.
I see the analogy, yeah.
Continuous evaluation in the workplace operates the exact same way. It easily devolves into panoptic surveillance, where the psychological contract of trust is replaced by the anxiety of constant visibility.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently, especially when we move from the theory of continuous data to its practical application on the ground. Let's look at how these real-time dashboards actually function when deployed correctly.
Okay, yeah, let's look at the reality.
So, the material highlights a multinational tech corporation that implemented continuous performance dashboards for their engineering teams. We're talking about tracking sprint completion rates, code quality metrics, and peer review engagement.
Mm-hmm.
In the old system, a dip in these metrics would be discovered months later, right before the annual review, and used retroactively to punish the employee.
A retroactive penalty, yes.
But under the IEPM framework, this continuous visibility transforms evaluation into shared problem solving. When a metric dips in real time, the dashboard flags it immediately. It doesn't trigger a disciplinary hearing, it triggers supportive resource provision.
Does it, though?
Yes, it initiates a conversation from the manager saying, "Hey, I see a roadblock here. How can I clear it for you?" We see the exact same success in the healthcare example from the text. A healthcare organization moved to continuous micro-feedback, where managers provided immediate behavior-based observations to nursing staff.
Right.
The result wasn't overwhelming anxiety. It was a drastic reduction in nursing turnover. When feedback is timely, objective, and entirely decoupled from the threat of your annual salary bump, it ceases to be surveillance and becomes proactive support.
I come at it from a different way because we have to look at how visibility fundamentally alters the nature of work itself. Angrave and his colleagues in 2016 pointed out a critical flaw in this logic. Data availability does not equal better socio-technical decisions.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you mentioned the tech corporation tracking peer review engagement on a dashboard, right?
Yes.
The moment you put peer collaboration on a tracked dashboard as a performance metric, you heavily incentivize the gaming of the metric rather than genuine collaboration.
How so?
Engineers are smart. If they know their collaboration score depends on how many peer reviews they do, they will start doing superficial code reviews just to get their numbers up.
Oh, I see.
They'll drop a "looks good to me" on 10 different projects without actually reading the code. The continuous dashboard doesn't create shared visibility. It creates a performative workspace. Every keystroke, every collaborative message, every minute spent on a digital platform is suddenly loaded with evaluative weight.
But you're assuming the AI is stupid. You're assuming it just counts the number of reviews. Modern AI doesn't just count tallies. It uses natural language processing to evaluate the substance of the feedback.
Right, but
It can tell the difference between a copy-pasted looks good and a genuinely constructive critique.
even if the AI is sophisticated, my point is you aren't clearing roadblocks. You're just forcing employees to spend half their cognitive energy managing the algorithms that track the roadblocks.
Well, if episodic reviews are riddled with subjective supervisor bias, as you've already conceded, and you dismiss continuous dashboards as surveillance and performative gaming, then what alternative exists? What system doesn't rely on blind faith and unseen employee contributions? We have to measure performance somehow.
We measure outcomes and output. We look at what the employee actually delivered, not every microprocess, keystroke, and behavioral tick along the way. When you track the process so granularly, you remove the employee's autonomy to navigate their own work.
I disagree completely. Measuring only outcomes is exactly what penalizes employees for things beyond their control.
How so?
If there's a market shift, a resource shortage, or a bottleneck in another department, the outcome suffers. If you only look at the final output, the employee takes the blame. By capturing the process and the inputs alongside the outputs, AI provides a holistic, fair picture.
I just think that's placing way too much faith in the algorithm to understand human context.
Well, if human managers can't process all this continuous data without turning it into a surveillance state, as you just argued, then who or what is actually looking at it? That brings us to the role of artificial intelligence itself. I see AI as the ultimate auditor of human prejudice.
The ultimate auditor. That's a big claim.
It is, but let's look at the specific example of the global consulting firm from Westover's analysis. They used natural language processing, or NLP, to analyze narrative performance reviews written by managers over the years.
I know this example.
So you know the algorithm scans thousands of narrative reviews, mapping word associations, and it successfully uncovered systemic gender bias that human HR professionals had missed for years.
Right.
It mathematically proved that female consultants were consistently judged on communication style and team dynamics, while male consultants with the exact same numerical performance ratings were praised for strategic thinking and leadership potential. The AI held a mirror up to the organization's unconscious bias.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Wait, you don't think identifying systemic gender bias is a win?
No. I will absolutely acknowledge that using NLP as a retrospective audit tool to catch biased language is a definitive win. That is a brilliant use of the technology.
Okay.
But deploying AI as the engine for processing continuous data to make predictive evaluations is a completely different beast.
Why? It's the same analytical capability.
Because Raghavan and colleagues in 2020 and Wachter in 2021 have clearly demonstrated that algorithmic fairness cannot be merely automated. You can't just install an algorithm, flip a switch, and declare the system objective. Algorithms are trained on historical data.
Yes, they need data to learn, obviously.
But what does that historical data consist of? It means they learn from the exact same biased managers we are trying to bypass. If you train a predictive model on 10 years of promotion data, and managers historically favored a certain assertive communication style typically associated with men, the algorithm mathematically institutionalizes that discrimination. It assumes that style is the baseline for success.
But organizations know this. That's why they use demographic parity testing to ensure the algorithm's outcomes are balanced across different groups.
Demographic parity testing is nothing but a statistical band-aid.
How is ensuring equal outcomes a band-aid?
Because it just forces the spreadsheet to look balanced. Let's say the algorithm forces an equal number of flags for promotion across different demographics to satisfy the parity test. It completely fails to account for the contextual nuance of human performance.
I think
You end up with this opaque black box where an algorithm predicts someone is a low performer or a flight risk based on hundreds of variables they can't see or understand.
I think you're overstating the opacity here.
Am I? You strip the employee of their agency. Under the old system, you had a biased human manager, sure, but you could at least argue with them. You could say, hey, I disagree with this rating because of X, Y, and Z. Now you're replacing that manager with a mathematical model the employee can't even comprehend, let alone challenge.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the black box concern. The IPM framework explicitly accounts for this through its cross-cutting governance layer. We aren't talking about autonomous algorithms firing people in the dark based on hidden variables.
Then what exactly are we talking about?
We're talking about algorithms governed by strict explainability requirements and contestability mechanisms. If an AI flags an employee as needing development, the system doesn't just issue a demerit.
Okay.
The manager is required to see the interpretable rationale. The system says, this employee is flagged because overtime increased by 40% and peer interaction dropped.
And what if the system is misinterpreting the context?
That's exactly where contestability comes in. The employee has a formal channel to challenge it. They can say, yes, my overtime is up and my interaction is down because I am covering a massive solo project for a colleague on medical leave.
Right.
The AI is a decision support tool, not a decision maker. It is a starting point for dialogue, and what it supports is the third most crucial layer of the framework, empathy-led leadership.
Empathy engineered by an algorithm.
No, empathy operationalized, so it actually happens in the real world. This is where we bridge the gap between hard data and the human experience. Let's look at the professional services firm in the source material. They actually made empathetic coaching 20% of a manager's formal performance evaluation.
Which sounds incredibly dystopian to me.
Why? They equipped these managers with well-being dashboards. These dashboards tracked excessive overtime, declining engagement scores, and vacation utilization. By doing this, they proactively prevented burnout before performance collapsed. We know from Deneve's 2024 research that employee well-being correlates directly with firm profitability and market valuation. So, by quantifying empathy and holding managers structurally accountable for the well-being of their teams, we aren't destroying psychological safety. We are structurally mandating it.
Turning empathy into a key performance indicator is a fundamental contradiction in terms. The moment you operationalize empathy as a metric, you corrupt the human connection.
I don't see how ensuring managers care for their teams corrupts the connection.
Because it becomes entirely transactional. If a manager knows that 20% of their own year-end bonus depends on their 360-degree empathy score, they are heavily incentivized to perform the mechanics of compassion rather than genuinely experiencing it.
But isn't performing the mechanics of compassion better than a manager who just ignores burnout entirely?
Not when it destroys trust. The conversation becomes, I am checking in on your well-being because my dashboard told me you work late 3 days in a row, and HR is tracking whether I initiate a supportive conversation with you within 24 hours. That isn't empathy, that is compliance.
I think employees care more about getting the support they need than the deep, philosophical purity of their manager's internal feelings.
It goes deeper than that, though. Monitoring an employee's time off utilization, their digital engagement footprint, or tracking their stress indicators completely crosses the boundary from professional evaluation into the monitoring of personal psychological states.
Wait, you think tracking vacation days is a psychological invasion?
Tracking how you interact, when your stress spikes, what your engagement looks like. Yes, absolutely. Edmondson's foundational 1999 work on psychological safety makes this incredibly clear. Psychological safety is the belief that interpersonal risk-taking is safe.
Right.
It's the belief that you can raise a hand and say, I'm overwhelmed without being penalized.
Which is exactly what this system encourages.
But how can it be safe to organically admit a struggle when your stress levels are already an integrated metric on your manager's dashboard? You lose the autonomy of disclosure. You are violating the very psychological safety the framework relies upon to function because the organization is peering into your mental state before you even offer it.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because, honestly, unmeasured empathy is just a corporate platitude. We have spent decades telling managers, you need to be more empathetic, and it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Why? Because the structural incentives only rewarded output and hitting targets.
So the solution is more metrics?
The solution is actionable data. Without data like predictive models identifying flight risks 6 months out, based on workload patterns and late-night email responses, organizations leave employee well-being entirely up to random chance. You are basically hoping that an employee happens to draw the lottery ticket of having an intuitively compassionate boss.
Or hoping they have the autonomy to manage their own boundaries.
But they often don't. What the IPEM framework does is say, hey, we are not leaving your mental health and your career trajectory to chance. We are going to use data to identify when you are overworked, and we are going to formally evaluate your boss on whether they step in to help you. The data doesn't replace the human dialogue, it triggers it before it's too late.
You're assuming the trigger is always benevolent.
Look at the financial institution in the source material. They use these exact predictive models to identify flight risks. It didn't lead to punishment or people getting sidelined. It led to career conversations that reduced regretted attrition by a third. That is a tangible, measurable improvement in human lives driven by algorithms.
A tangible improvement driven by a system that requires the organization to constantly monitor the behavioral patterns of its employees to predict their psychological state.
Yes?
Yes, it might catch a flight risk early. It might force a bad manager to have a conversation. But the cost is the total collapse of the boundary between the employee's work and the employer's surveillance.
I think you're conflating visibility with surveillance. Surveillance implies malicious intent.
Surveillance is about power, regardless of intent. When well-being is an integrated metric on a centralized dashboard, flexibility becomes a complete illusion. The material talks about decoupling evaluation from presenteeism by trusting employees to manage their own work patterns.
Right, focusing on outcomes and holistic process, not just who is sitting at a desk from 9 to 5.
But if the system is still tracking your digital engagement, how quickly you respond in Slack, how many commits you make in GitHub, and flagging your manager when your metrics deviate from your historical baseline, you aren't truly autonomous.
Well,
you are just tethered to a digital leash rather than a physical desk. The psychological contract shifts. The employee is no longer a trusted professional delivering an outcome. They are a data-generating node in an HR analytics matrix.
But that perspective ignores the reality of how these tools are evolving in real time and the strict governance structures being put in place globally to regulate them.
Regulations often lag years behind the technology. You know that.
True, but look at the EU's AI Act, look at GDPR, look at internal fairness and ethics review committees. These aren't just suggestions, they are structural mandates.
Right.
The text provides the example of the European financial institution that instituted mandatory explainability standards. They gave employees complete access to all data used in their evaluation and established human override authority for all algorithmic conclusions.
Which is a necessary safeguard, I'll admit.
It is the scaffolding. We are building the scaffolding to ensure that hyper-quantification serves the employee, not the other way around. The transition from the old evaluative contract to a developmental one requires explicit communication, yes, but once an employee sees that the data is genuinely being used to support their growth, to offer training before they fail, to enforce work-life boundaries when they are pushing too hard, that cynicism you're describing dissolves.
I genuinely hope you're right. But history tells us a different story. Whenever organizations gain the capacity to deeply measure something, they eventually optimize for it.
Right.
And they almost always optimize for it at the expense of the unmeasurable human elements. Cultivating continuous learning, implementing controlled experimentation, bringing in academic partnerships to audit these systems.
All of which are recommended in the text, actually.
They are. And they are valid and necessary if we are going down this path. But they also highlight just how incredibly fragile this entire ecosystem is. It requires perfect governance. The moment leadership changes or economic pressure mounts and quarterly earnings dip, a system designed for empathy-led development can be instantly weaponized into a high-precision digital panopticon.
Which brings us to the crux of where we stand today. The IPM framework represents, in my view, a profoundly necessary evolution in how we work. By fusing multidimensional metrics, thoughtfully governed AI, and structurally accountable empathetic leadership, organizations finally have a toolkit to escape the biased, demotivating legacy of the annual review.
We agree on the failure of the old system.
Yes, and this new system allows us to stop guessing about performance and start measuring it fairly. By separating the objective reality of the work from the subjective judgment of the manager, we create a truly developmental psychological contract.
It's a world where data serves as the foundation for growth, not a weapon for punishment. The old system was blind. This new system gives us sight and challenges us to use it responsibly.
And while I concede that the goals of this framework are noble, I maintain that hyper-quantifying human behavior and digitizing well-being metrics carries profound inherent risks. My warning is simply this. In our rush to engineer psychological safety through continuous algorithmic tracking, we may ultimately replace the flawed but human judge with an inescapable, opaque digital one.
Right.
True empathy requires space, autonomy, and the absence of surveillance. Those are things a perfectly optimized real-time dashboard simply cannot provide.
Well, despite our philosophical differences on the mechanisms, I think we have reached a strong point of shared convergence today. We both absolutely agree that the era of the rigid, supervisor-driven annual appraisal is decisively over. It belongs in the past.
Without a doubt.
We also agree that employee well-being is no longer just a peripheral HR benefit or a nice-to-have bullet point on a corporate brochure. It is a core, undeniable driver of sustainable organizational performance.
Absolutely. The debate isn't about whether we should support employee development and well-being. It's about how we do so without losing the humanity in our human resources.
Westover's analysis of the IPEM framework really does open up a critical frontier in modern management. It suggests that the true test of future organizations won't just be their technological sophistication.
No.
The true test will be their ability to navigate the incredibly razor-thin line between data-driven support and digital surveillance. We started this discussion by comparing the old system to a blurry, biased photograph, and the new system to a continuous high-definition live stream.
Yeah.
The question that remains is who is holding the camera, and whether we are being watched so that we can be supported or watched so that we can be controlled. We leave it to you to decide which path will define the future of your own workplace.